I was about to lose my $1 million empire because my daughters hadn't slept in 47 days. Then our housekeeper, a woman I almost fired, whispered something to them that changed our lives forever. The monitors flickered blue in the darkness of the twins' bedroom, casting ghostly shadows across their exhausted faces. Sophia and Olivia Harrington, once vibrant 5-year-olds with infectious giggles, now lay in their custom-designed beds with hollow eyes fixed on the ceiling. Their father, Richard, slumped in the doorway, his 6'3" frame seeming to fold in on itself as he watched another sleepless night unfold. "Daddy, the shadows are moving again," Sophia whispered, her voice thin and reedy from exhaustion. "I know, sweetheart," Richard responded, the words catching in his throat. He'd been answering the same comment for 47 straight nights, ever since the accident that took Caroline from them. The dark circles under the girl's eyes matched his own. The pediatrician had warned him yesterday that if the twins didn't get proper sleep soon, they might need hospitalization. The thought of his daughters in hospital beds made Richard's chest constrict with panic. He'd already lost his wife. The possibility of losing his children to this mysterious affliction was unbearable. "Mr. Harrington?" A soft voice came from behind him. Elena Vasile, the housekeeper he'd hired 3 weeks ago, stood in the hallway with 2 steaming mugs. "I made chamomile tea. Perhaps it will help." Richard accepted the mug gratefully, though he'd lost faith in simple remedies. They tried everything: melatonin, white noise machines, blackout curtains, weighted blankets, hypnotherapy, even experimental sleep medications from a specialist in Zurich who charged $1,500 per consultation. "Nothing works," he whispered to Elena, stepping away from the doorway so the twins wouldn't hear his despair. "Dr. Bernstein says if they don't sleep soon, their immune systems will start shutting down." The reality of his situation crashed over him in waves. 6 months ago, they'd been the picture-perfect family, Caroline with her radiant smile, the twins with their boundless energy, and Richard with his thriving architectural firm that designed buildings across 3 continents. Now, he was a shell of himself, missing deadlines, losing clients, and watching his life's work crumble while his daughters wasted away before his eyes. Just yesterday, he'd nearly lost the Shanghai International Tower contract, a $47 million project, when he'd fallen asleep during the client presentation. His business partner, Marcus, had covered for him, but the warning had been clear: get it together or step down. "Have you considered that perhaps this isn't merely a medical condition?" Elena asked quietly, her Romanian accent becoming more pronounced as she lowered her voice. Richard wanted to snap at her. He'd consulted the top pediatric neurologists in the country, specialists who had studied childhood sleep disorders for decades. What could this housekeeper possibly know that they didn't? But exhaustion had stripped away his arrogance along with his patience. "What do you mean?" he asked instead. Elena's eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber, held his gaze steadily. "In my village, we believe that grief and sleep are deeply connected, especially for children. When my sister lost her husband, her son could not sleep for many weeks. The doctors had no answers. It was my grandmother who finally helped." A month ago, Richard would have dismissed such talk immediately, but desperation had made him willing to consider anything, absolutely anything, that might help his daughters. "Tell me," he said simply. Elena hesitated, clearly weighing her words. Children who experience great loss sometimes fear sleep because dreams blur the line between worlds. They worry if they sleep deeply, they might follow their loved one away from this life. Or worse, they fear sleeping because waking means losing their mother all over again, each morning. Richard felt a chill run through him. Neither he nor any of the specialists had considered this perspective. The twins had started therapy immediately after Caroline's death, but their therapist focused primarily on their daytime coping mechanisms. No one had specifically addressed their fear of sleep itself. "The night before you hired me," Elena continued, "I found a photograph in Mrs. Harrington's study while dusting. She was in a garden, planting lavender." Richard's throat tightened. The garden had been Caroline's sanctuary. After her death, he couldn't bear to look at it, much less tend to it. It had become overgrown, the lavender and herbs Caroline had lovingly cultivated now fighting for survival among encroaching weeds. Caroline loved that garden, he whispered. She used to say the scent of lavender could cure anything. In the bedroom, Olivia began to whimper, the precursor to the screaming nightmares that had become routine around 2 a.m. Richard moved to go to her, but Elena gently touched his arm. Mr. Harrington, please, let me try something tonight. If it doesn't work, you can fire me tomorrow. Richard stared at her. Elena had been efficient and quiet since he'd hired her, but they'd barely spoken beyond household matters. There was something in her eyes now, a knowing sadness, a depth of understanding that made him wonder what grief she herself had endured. What are you going to do? He asked. Something my grandmother taught me, she replied. Something that helped my nephew when nothing else would. Richard hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. At this point, I'd let you bring in a circus if you thought it would help them sleep. A ghost of a smile touched Elena's lips. No circus, just old wisdom and a mother's garden. As Elena slipped into the twins' bedroom, Richard remained in the hallway, listening. He heard her voice, soft and melodic, speaking to his daughters in a mixture of English and what he assumed was Romanian. The girls' responses were faint but curious, the most engaged he'd heard them sound at night in weeks. He leaned against the wall, closing his burning eyes for just a moment. Somewhere in the distance, his phone chimed with another email, probably Marcus, warning him about tomorrow's crucial meeting with the investors who were threatening to pull funding from the Dubai project. Another piece of his collapsing empire demanding attention he couldn't give, because nothing, not the buildings that had made him famous, not the fortune he'd amassed, not the awards lining his office walls, none of it mattered if he lost his daughters to this waking nightmare. When Richard opened his eyes, sunlight was streaming through the hallway windows. He jerked upright, disoriented. He'd somehow slid down the wall and fallen asleep right there in the corridor. His watch read 7:43 a.m. For the first time in nearly 7 weeks, he'd slept through the night. Panic seized him as he scrambled to his feet. The twins. He rushed to their bedroom door and froze at the threshold, unable to process the scene before him. Sophia and Olivia were sleeping peacefully, their small chests rising and falling in the rhythm of deep slumber. Between their beds sat Elena, her head resting on the edge of Olivia's mattress, also asleep. On the nightstands were 2 small, hand-sewn pillows, no bigger than his palm, emitting a gentle fragrance that reminded him instantly of Caroline. As if sensing his presence, Elena stirred and lifted her head. When she saw Richard, she quickly stood up, smoothing her rumpled uniform. They've been asleep since 3 a.m., she whispered, moving toward the door. Almost 5 hours now. We should let them continue. Richard followed her into the hallway, closing the door softly behind them. His mind raced with questions, but one dominated. How? What did you do? Elena gestured for him to follow her downstairs. In the kitchen, a space that had once been filled with Caroline's laughter and experimental recipes, but had recently become just another empty room in their hollow mansion. Elena began preparing coffee. I should tell you something, Mr. Harrington, she said, her back to him as she measured the grounds. Something I didn't mention when you hired me. Richard tensed. Was she about to confess to drugging his children? Had his desperation led him to allow something dangerous? I'm not just a housekeeper, she continued, turning to face him. In Romania, before I came to America, I was a child psychologist specializing in grief counseling. Richard stared at her. Why didn't you say anything? Why are you working as a housekeeper when you have those credentials? Elena's eyes dropped to her hands, which were gripping the edge of the counter. My credentials don't transfer easily to America. I would need years of additional schooling, exams, certifications. And after what happened? Her voice trailed off. After what happened? Richard prompted gently. Elena took a deep breath. I lost my son, Mihai, 5 years ago. Leukemia. He was 7. After his death, I couldn't continue my practice. How could I counsel parents on child grief when I could barely survive my own? The coffee maker gurgled in the background as silence stretched between them. Richard felt a new connection forming, the invisible thread that links those who have experienced profound loss. I came to America for a fresh start. Elena continued. I took housekeeping jobs because they required no emotional investment, just physical labor, which sometimes helps with grief. But then I saw your advertisement, widower with twins needing live-in help, and something told me I was meant to be here. Richard sank onto a kitchen stool, processing this revelation. So last night, what you did with the girls. I combined my professional training with my grandmother's traditional wisdom, Elena explained, pouring 2 cups of coffee. In my village, we believe that grief can trap children between worlds. The lavender pillows I made contain herbs from your wife's garden, a physical connection to their mother. The lullaby teaches them that sleep is not abandonment but connection. She placed a mug before Richard, the steam rising between them. But most importantly, I recognized what modern medicine often misses. The twins aren't suffering from typical insomnia. They're experiencing what we call grief guarding. They're staying awake to protect you. Richard's coffee paused halfway to his lips. Protect me? From what? From your own grief, Elena said softly. Children are intuitive. They see you struggling, trying to maintain your business, run this household, process your own loss, all while caring for them. They believe that if they sleep, something terrible might happen to you too. The truth of her words hit Richard with physical force. He'd been so focused on maintaining a facade of strength, of proving he could handle everything alone, that he hadn't realized his daughters were watching his slow collapse. What did you tell them? He asked, his voice barely audible. I told them that their mother asked me to help you all, Elena said. A small fiction, perhaps, but one with emotional truth. I explained that when they sleep, they give you permission to rest too, that their mother watches over all of you during dreams. Richard should have been angry at this presumption, the stranger speaking to his children about their mother. Instead, tears filled his eyes for the first time since Caroline's funeral. I also told them about Mihai, Elena continued, how he visits me in my dreams now, how sleep has become sacred to me because it's where I can still feel connected to him. She reached across the counter and, in a gesture that crossed professional boundaries but met a profound human need, placed her hand over Richard's. Mr. Harrington, your daughters don't need more specialists or medications. They need to know that it's safe to sleep, that you will be okay if they let go of their vigil, and you need to show them that you're healing too. Richard looked up at this woman, not just a housekeeper, but someone who carried wisdom born of unspeakable pain, someone who had somehow found a way forward. Call me Richard, he said quietly. Before Elena could respond, the baby monitor on the counter crackled to life. Daddy, Sophia's voice, groggy with sleep but stronger than it had been in weeks. Daddy, I had a dream about Mommy. She was in her garden. Richard grabbed the monitor. I'll be right there, sweetheart. He looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. Go. They need to see your face when they wake, to know that their sleep didn't cause anything bad to happen. As Richard hurried upstairs, he felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the rigid control he'd maintained since Caroline's death. The twins had slept. For the first time in nearly 2 months, they had slept. And somehow, so had he. Whatever Elena had done, whether it was her psychological training or her grandmother's folk remedies, or simply her own hard-won understanding of grief, she had unlocked something that all the specialists and their expensive treatments had failed to touch. For the first time since the accident, Richard felt something dangerously close to hope. 3 months later, the Harrington estate was transformed. The gardens that had fallen into disrepair now flourished again, with the twins spending hours each day helping Elena tend to their mother's beloved lavender, rosemary, and chamomile. The heavy curtains that had once blocked out all light now remained open, allowing sunshine to stream through windows that sparkled from recent cleaning. But the most profound transformation had occurred within the family itself. Richard stood in the doorway of his home office, watching as Elena sat cross-legged on the living room floor between Sophia and Olivia. They were crafting tiny sachets for the lavender they'd harvested that morning, a ritual that had become part of their weekly routine. The twins' laughter echoed through the house, no longer the hollow, forced sounds of children trying to please worried adults, but genuine expressions of joy. Daddy, look! Sophia held up a small purple pouch. I made this one for Mr. Marcus. Elena says it will help him sleep on the airplane to Tokyo. Elena's hands stilled on the lavender stems she was bundling. Her eyes met Richard's, a question in their depths. What do you mean, Daddy? Sophia asked, leaning against Elena's shoulder possessively. Richard took a deep breath. I've spoken with an immigration attorney. There are several options that would allow Elena to stay in the country long-term. One would be for me to sponsor her education, so she could complete the certifications needed to practice child psychology here in the States. Elena's lips parted in surprise. Richard, that's incredibly generous, but the cost is nothing compared to what you've given us, Richard finished firmly. But there's another option too, one that depends not just on my wishes, but on all of ours. He slid from the sofa to join their circle on the floor, a gesture that would have been unthinkable for the formal, reserved man he'd been before tragedy struck his family. Girls, how would you feel if Elena became more than our housekeeper? If she became a permanent part of our family? The twins exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them with the intuitive understanding unique to identical twins. Like an adoption? Olivia asked seriously. Richard laughed softly. Not exactly. More like. He looked directly at Elena, whose face had gone very still. More like a marriage. If Elena would consider it. The room went silent. Even the birds outside seemed to pause their singing. You want to marry Elena? Sophia asked, her voice small and uncertain. Richard reached out to take his daughter's hand. I'm not trying to replace your mother, he said gently. No one could ever replace Caroline. She will always be your mom, and we will always love and remember her. But, he continued, Elena has brought healing back into our home. She's helped us find a way to keep your mother's memory alive while also finding joy again. And over these months, I've grown to care for her very deeply. He turned to Elena, whose eyes glistened with unshed tears. I know this is sudden, and perhaps completely inappropriate. If you don't feel the same, I understand completely, and I promise nothing will change about your position here. Richard, Elena interrupted softly. She glanced at the twins, then back to him. This isn't something to decide impulsively. It's not impulsive, Richard insisted. I've been thinking about it for weeks. I've even spoken with Dr. Hamilton about it. He referred to the family therapist they'd all been seeing together. Another of Elena's suggestions that had proved invaluable. And what did Dr. Hamilton say? Elena asked, a hint of amusement breaking through her shock. She said I should make sure I'm not just confusing gratitude with deeper feelings, Richard admitted. But she also said that sometimes, the people who help us heal become part of that healing themselves. Olivia, always the more reserved of the twins, suddenly crawled into Elena's lap. I already wished you were our second mom, she confessed in a whisper that everyone could hear. When I blow out my birthday candles next week, that's what I was going to wish for. Elena wrapped her arms around the child, unable to hold back her tears any longer. Oh, Draga Mea, she murmured, using the Romanian endearment that had become familiar to them all. Before you answer, Richard said, there's something else you should know. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. I've been in contact with the Children's Grief Center in Boston. They're looking for a program director with expertise in both clinical psychology and personal experience with loss. I sent them your credentials, and they're very interested in meeting you. Elena stared at the envelope he extended toward her. You did this? Without telling me. I wanted it to be an option, whatever you decide about us, Richard explained. Your gift shouldn't be limited to just our family. There are so many children who could benefit from what you know, from what you've lived through. Elena looked around at the three faces watching her expectantly, Richard with nervous hope, the twins with undisguised longing. This broken family that had somehow become her own. When she'd first arrived at the Harrington estate, she'd been running from her past, trying to numb herself to the pain of losing Mihai by burying herself in work that required no emotional investment. She never expected to find another child to love, let alone two. And she certainly never expected to find her heart opening to a man whose grief mirrored her own. I can't replace Caroline, she said finally, looking directly at Richard. I wouldn't want to try. I know, he assured her. That's not what I'm asking. And the girls need time to understand what this would mean, she continued. We all do. Richard nodded, disappointment flickering across his face despite his best efforts to hide it. But, Elena added, a smile slowly spreading across her face. I think perhaps we could explore this possibility together, as we have everything else. Sophia squealed and threw her arms around Elena's neck, nearly knocking her backward. Olivia, still in Elena's lap, pressed her face against her shoulder in quiet happiness. Richard reached out and took Elena's hand, careful not to disturb the embrace of the twins. Together sounds perfect, he said softly. Later that evening, after the twins were tucked into bed, a process that had once been fraught with anxiety but was now a peaceful ritual involving lavender pillows, Romanian lullabies, and whispered conversations about dreams, Richard and Elena stood in Caroline's garden under a sky dusted with stars. Do you think she would mind? Elena asked quietly, looking up at the constellations. Caroline, I mean. Richard considered the question carefully. Caroline loved the girls more than anything in the world, he said finally. She would want them to be happy, to be loved. And I think she would be grateful to you for bringing life back into this home when it seemed like all the light had gone out. Elena leaned against him slightly, and he put his arm around her shoulders. It was a tentative gesture, new and uncertain, but it felt right. In my village, Elena said, we believe that those we've lost never truly leave us, that they find ways to guide us, even after they're gone. Richard thought about the strange series of coincidences that had brought Elena to them, the timing of her visa, the particular agency she'd registered with, the fact that she'd been available exactly when they needed her most. Maybe, he said, looking up at the same stars. This was Caroline's final gift to us all. In the upstairs window, two small figures in matching pajamas watched the adults in the garden. Sophia and Olivia exchanged glances, their twin connection allowing them to share thoughts without words. Mommy would be happy, Sophia whispered. Olivia nodded, squeezing her sister's hand. She sent Elena to us? She replied with the absolute certainty only a child can possess. I saw her in my dream. She said Elena's heart needed healing too. The twins crawled back into their beds, pulling their lavender pillows close. For the first time since their mother's death, the Harrington household slept deeply and peacefully through the night, all four of them finding, in their dreams, the connections that would help them build a new kind of family from the fragments of their broken hearts. And in the garden, the lavender Caroline had planted continued to bloom, its scent carrying healing on the night breeze.